like at that point when I, made a decision that I wanted to turn things around. Like I said, it was fleeting a little bit, but I was just broke down. Whatever that rock bottom moment is, which it's different for everybody. For me, it was this cold, wintry Michigan night where I didn't have any place to go. I'm near the hospital, and I decided to go in and be like, listen, I need some help.
Today's guest is Keegan Caldwell, a Marine, a scientist, an entrepreneur whose life reads like a redemption arc with global impact. From being arrested 13 times and facing the revolving door of jail and addiction, to founding Caldwell IP, a law firm that started in a windowless room at MIT that now has offices stretching from Boston to Tokyo, Keegan's story is a lesson in discipline, risk-taking, and resilience. He shares the pivotal moment, a cold Michigan night where desperation turned to hope, how the GI Bill launched him from high school dropout to earning a PhD in chemistry and passing the California bar without ever attending law school. But beyond the titles, what resonates most is his commitment to mentorship, bringing intellectual property rights to incarcerated entrepreneurs, using his past not as baggage, but as fuel. He brings that same drive home, raising his kids with vision boards and monthly check-ins, proving that the best stories aren't about perfection, they're about persistence. Keegan's life serves as a blueprint for turning struggle into strategy. Let's start the show. Keegan Caldwell, thank you so much for joining. I've been chasing you for some time now, and I'm really grateful that you're finally here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for being persistent, man.
So you and I have come in contact with each other through a separate group, which I want to talk about, Strategic Coach, as it relates to some broader themes within your life. There's so many things that I find interesting about your perspective. I'm looking off to the side because I want to make sure that I don't mince any of this, but you are the managing partner of an intellectual property law firm, but you never went to law school. Is that correct?
That's true. We don't just do IP now. We have a corporate practice as well, but we started as an
Excellent.
IP boutique. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad that you clarified that.
Yep.
I find that super fascinating. You have a background, you have a PhD in chemistry,
Yep.
in physical chemistry from George Washington University.
Yeah.
You've got a background in biomedical sciences. All of that I think is super fascinating. How you got into law, I want to talk about that. But you're now the third or fourth veteran from you were at the U.S. Marine Corps, correct?
Yeah. I was in the Marines too. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I did that right after high school. Yeah.
So I want to talk about that, but I don't know if it was preceding that or concurrent with it. But I want to talk a little bit about your substance abuse
Sure.
area. I know that there were some felonies, and this area of your life comes back full circle that I want to talk about as well.
Yeah.
But this sort of beats on a drum that I've seen relevant in a number of different guests. Okay. Those who are entrepreneurs, those who are successful in their own right, how they incorporate some of the discipline, the mindsets, the challenges that they've encountered through substance abuse and sort of getting through that. So I just wanted to lay a little bit of the groundwork, but I want you to take it in whatever direction you feel most appropriate. But I'm really interested to hear at what point in your life was that, did that come into fruition, and how did you utilize that moving forward?
Sure. Yeah. I'll dive right into substance abuse because I think that's an easy place to start. So, um, and uh, it also is kind of like the beginning of a lot of pain and misfortune, self-inflicted, that I really think informs a lot of what I do today, and that I'm profoundly grateful for as well. So, uh, like anybody growing up, I had a fairly decent childhood. I have a very loving family. There was no shortage of love, right? We're definitely, we're a blue collar family through and through, but my folks today, I was in New York City at the NASDAQ studio yesterday, and my mom's like, she just calls me crying because she was like, I remember when you used to work the McDonald's drive-through window, and it was like, and to me, it's even, kind of surreal too, but it's also, just a blessing and an amazing opportunity that I don't take for granted because of all the life experiences that I've had. So, um, yeah, you know, self-conscious, uh, not comfortable in my own skin, sort of teenager, trying to find my place in the world, trying, all of this. And I think some combination of that plus just generally uh, not challenged like at school. I was always like a very good student. And then I, started smoking a little bit of weed here and there, and then this was before it was legal everywhere in the world, and so still an illegal activity at that point, which is just crazy to me. That's a whole nother side thing. Anyways, I mean, I think I have no real position on the legality of marijuana or anything like that, but it's definitely for those of us that have lived in both worlds. Um, it's uh, it's bizarre in some ways to be like, oh my gosh, I thought you had to look over your shoulder all the time, and now it's just like you can do whatever you
Right.
want. Um, and But that quickly progressed for me, right? And so where then I started to drink a lot, and then got into psychedelics and other harder substances, and where by the time that I was supposed to be graduating high school, I was dependent on opiates, and so whatever form, either pain medication or stuff that I was buying on the street, sometimes heroin, and it was a tough scenario. But really, what it boiled down to, as far as my story is concerned, is that I wasn't. Um, Although my freshman and sophomore year, I was a you know mm, maybe B plus A minus student, something like that. I Yeah, I was barely even going to school anymore, right? Like I would barely even show up. I'd given up that part of my life, and there was zero effort being set forth. And I ended up not graduating high school. Um, I didn't have college opportunities. I didn't have any ambition to want to go to do those things. Um, and one day, a good friend of mine just called me and said, "Hey, do you want to smoke a joint?" And I said, "Sure." And he came and picked me up, and we bogged out his little Toyota Tercel. And then he was like, I have an appointment I have to go to." And I was like, well, why isn't he telling me where it is that he has to go? This is driving me nuts. And we like pull up to the Marine Corps recruiting center, and I was like, "Oh, dude, I'm not going in there." And he goes in, and I was like, "I'm sitting in the car." And so I sit and wait in the car like 5 minutes or something like that. And then I was like, whatever. And so I go in, and we must have had like the best, that salesman, that recruiter was one of the best salesmen I've ever met in my life, because we were there for like 4 hours. And by the time we left, I went from like, this is the last decision I'd ever make in my life, to America, let's go. It's like, we need
Well,
to
one might argue you were impaired, so maybe
get. And so, anyways, I signed up for the service, and that provided me with some structure in my life that was much needed. Like I was like removed. There's a zero tolerance policy in the Marine Corps for you know any drug use, right? I mean, you can drink obviously, but um, even that is like pretty limited because you're so busy. You have like a lot of structure, and every day is uh, this routine that doesn't allow you a lot of time to go engage in something that would uh, be a huge distraction from those things. And so and it, to keep this part kind of short, I guess that gave me some structure that was useful. But fast forward a few years when I get out of the service. As soon as I get out of the service, though, then uh, it was I had trouble like finding my place again. You go back from like having like a job where you're important, and I had several meritorious promotions while I was in the service, and um, I had a great Marine Corps career while I was there. And then you come back and you're like, oh shoot, what the heck am I going to do? All of my buddies were getting done, had completed college at this point, for friends of mine that did go to college, and um, I still found myself kind of this guy who didn't graduate high school. And although I did complete school in the Marine Corps, but in the same position where I was just trying to find like my place and get my feet underneath me. But I just turned right back to the same thing, you're right, and got right back into drinking too much and using drugs. And unfortunately at that time it just progressed it got even worse. where I got in heaps of legal trouble. Was arrested several times for possession, um, and did several stints in jail as a result of some of those arrests too. So there was like a 3 year period basically from 2003 until 2006 where I was arrested 13 different times and was basically like a revolving door for me. And um, I was a mess. I didn't have a lot of respect for my own life or for the lives of those around me. I think, like many people that are caught in the depths of addiction, like we think that what we're doing is not affecting others, and I certainly thought that, and only after several years of being sober that I think I was able to be like, oh wow, like a lot of my behavior was having a terrible effect on those around me, right? And I even experienced that in my own life today with family members that struggle with drinking and substance abuse, and you want the best for them, but there's just nothing, there's not much that you can do, and you can see them kind of destroying their life, um, and for my family members too, like my folks, I said that they're very loving and always supportive, and we weren't a family of means, but uh, I had betrayed all of their trust, in this period of time. Interestingly, though, I also started like my first business during this time period and was just working as like a general contractor and or as a subcontractor rather for a large home builder, like building decks and screened-in porches. And that was great. That felt natural to me, so like that was kind of like my first little sprinkling of like, oh man, I've got like this little bit of hustle, because I was like framing houses and making like a good wage, per hour doing that. But I had grown up like on job sites also, and I was like, well gosh, I feel like I could make a lot more money if I just did this for myself. And it was like, all I need is like a pickup truck and a handful of tools and off I go, right? And so uh I remember like printing up some business cards, going to like a Kinko's and printing up like some, handyman sort of business cards or whatever. And like I was working a job for, a framer, like getting paid by the hour. And I'd get done with that day working in the sun, and then um, go do like door to door, like handing out my business cards saying, hey, if you ever need somebody, let me know. And I'd just go drive to like the nicest neighborhood wherever it was that I was living at the time, which was in the Washington D.C. area. And eventually, people started to call, and I got enough work where I could quit the job where I was working, and probably also, unfortunately, though, that gave me some flexibility with my schedule that allowed, and more money that allowed, my uh, addiction to progress, right? Where I wasn't needing to scrape by as much, and things, continued to get worse for me, right? Where even if I had went to jail for a few days or something like that, at that point, it wasn't, I didn't lose my job or anything like that, right? Like
Right.
still had the business, and nothing was that time sensitive as like a subcontractor for most of those jobs that I was working on. So um, the repercussions were not big for doing that. So this period of time in my life, like that, like '03 to '06, was just well, super painful.
That
And
was so. What this? How old were you at this point?
I'm
How old were you during the Marine Corps? Were you? It sounds like 18 to 21 ish.
yeah, like yeah, 18 to 22, and then got out, and then so now uh yeah, I'm rough, 23, like basically like 22 to 26, yeah, yeah. And um it was I had no even though I had my GI Bill, I had like no intention of like using it to go to school or anything like that. I hadn't even thought about it, right? I had like a grandmother that had encouraged me. She was like, listen, like, she knew that I was getting in a lot of legal trouble and was just struggling with life in general. And I come from a huge family like this. I grew up across the street from my grandparents. They had 9 kids. I've got, I don't know, I think like 52 first cousins or something like that. Like we have a really big family. And so, when you have a family that big, you tend to learn a lot about compassion for others, at least hopefully, because you have people from all walks of life, right? You got the haves, you got the have nots, you got the people that are, have, deep faith in their lives. You have people that don't or practice different faiths, maybe even. You got people that are, blue collar people. You got white, you got it all, right? And but we all get together for the holidays and spend time together. And I felt like I got a lot of confidence learning how to connect with many different types of people, just like family events growing up, right? Because you were thrust into these different social dynamics, but you didn't think it was weird. That was just how you grew up, and that was what was normal. And so you get used to doing that. That's what the norm was for you as a kid. Um, so it was all this time was like just really tough, and I couldn't get it together. Was substance dependent, and in the December of 2005, it was like cold. I was in Michigan, uh, and one night I was just like, I've just had enough of this, and I like went to the hospital. I mean, I was very sick, like I was, I don't know, probably 60, 70 pounds less than what I weigh now. And I'm not in great shape, but I'm in decent shape now. And so like, but I was, skin and bones at that point. And, very unhealthy, and I mean, maybe I'd eat once every couple days or something like that, and it would be like some little Debbie's, or a couple oatmeal cream pies you'd take from a gas station or something like that, or like maybe a hot dog from a Speedway or something. I was living the high life. And anyways, that was like a big turning point for me. So like and it was fleeting too. I know this whole I know the podcast isn't a recovery focused podcast, but I think for a lot of people that are just entering sobriety too, that like, things will get painful enough for you that you're like, oh man, I should really change some things. But then like two weeks later, after you kind of dry yourself out and do a little bit of spin dry, you're like, I'm probably good now. Right. And so even
Well,
with
that's sort of,
all
I
the
do want to,
terrible stuff that happened, you're
I'm
like,
glad that you can laugh at this because I do think I'm sure there was some pain involved here, but I don't want this to, I don't want us to necessarily ruminate on this particular part of your life,
yeah,
although I
yeah,
think there's a lot of great things here.
sure.
But what I am curious about those who go through it, and I don't think I've ever been a problem, but I have between drinking and other stuff, I have increasingly become aware of its involvement in my life.
Yeah,
And there are times where my productivity might go down,
yeah,
certainly earlier in my life where, when the end of the day might come by and it's like, I really haven't done jack shit and
yeah,
I don't feel good about that. And that sort of compounds. I mentioned that because I'm curious what you see from my perspective, what I've witnessed from those who've come out of recovery successfully are a number of things. One is sort of hitting rock bottom.
yeah,
It's sort of losing, acknowledging that you've lost touch with yourself in some way, or not ever maybe had a knowledge of who that self was.
hmm,
But what I'm most interested in is at that moment for those people who have met that nadir, what do they do? What do they find? What is that element that is the motivation, the inspiration that says, okay, I got to get my shit together. I am now ready to do this work, because I think that same thing is also what may have likely been what's made you successful in your entrepreneurial endeavors. And in some ways, I sort of think I'm offering this because I could be wrong, but my
sure,
my
yeah,
sort of view from this, it actually seems like, drugs in many ways, I know that there are chemical components to people's brains that are certainly that contribute to this, but there's also I have from those who have overcome substance abuse, who've become productive members of society, have an itch. They have something that they are hungry for something in life. They are looking to be productive. They are looking to do different things. But if they're not actively engaged with that, it gets supplanted with these other fillers that just completely change your trajectory. And I guess in your take, is there any truth to that? What have you found most specifically? I'd welcome any input that you have to this, but I'm really interested in what ultimately pulled you out, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
going to the Marine Corps with your buddy who was stoned and said, "Hey, I'm going to go sign up," and you sitting in the car for 15 minutes and saying, "I'm going to go sign up." Maybe that's a stroke of inspiration from the Lord above or something.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in it, like, now it starts to get a little bit real. When you get out, you struggle to find your footing. A lot of
Yeah.
people who have been in the military
Yeah.
struggle with that same thing. But
Yeah.
then you get into subcontracting, you start to find purpose, you start to find money, and then it rears its head again, because now it's
Yeah.
not just
Yeah, it was
now
in
the
waves.
availability.
Yeah, exactly. And some of it
Exactly.
was like in waves. I mean, that's what's so tricky. I always tell people, like, the hardest thing about diagnosing, alcoholism or addiction is that you have to diagnose it yourself. You
Right.
don't just go to the doctor and they're like, you're an addict or you're an alcoholic. Usually that's not the case. It's something that you have to diagnose yourself, and it's the last thing that you want to diagnose yourself with, right? You're like,
Right.
I don't want to have that. I'm really enjoying myself doing this, right? Even if you're not enjoying yourself, you don't want to have that affliction. And so, um, yes, it was a super tough time, and I do think though that those uh, like at that point when I made a decision that I wanted to turn things around. Like I said, it was fleeting a little bit, but I was just broke down. Whatever that rock bottom moment is, which it's different for everybody. For me, it was this cold, wintry Michigan night where I didn't have any place to go. I'm near the hospital, and I decided to go in and be like, listen, I need some help.
When you didn't have a place to go, you mean homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'd be staying in hotels, sometimes I'd
Yeah.
be um, crashing on somebody's couch or something like that. But it was a mix of those things, and
Sure.
so I went in and I said, hey, listen, I'm not doing well. I'm an addict. I need help. And they're like, oh, you're gonna have to do better than that. Like, are you gonna hurt yourself or is there something else wrong? Whatever. Anyways, eventually they let me in, um, and get me to a treatment center, which was great. So I went to this treatment center in Detroit, Michigan. This was It was not a fancy place. In the realm of treatment centers. I think this is about as humble as it gets. It was basically like an abandoned house turned into a place to help take care of folks. But it's what worked for me. And so I went to this place. Like I said before, I'd alienated a lot of my family, and so mm, I was really just focused like on trying to take care of myself and trying to just make it through each day. Because some days you were like, oh yeah, I need to get out of this. I don't want to go back out uh, into doing in relapse. But that voice inside your head is really loud too. And so I just focused on taking care of myself and doing my recovery. I've been involved with 12-step recovery for about two decades, and it's that's been a great thing for me. I know there's people that do things different ways, but for me, that is I was just doing another podcast with someone else, and I was saying, like, that's my secret weapon. Like all of my personal introspection, and because I'm not focused on it's always my goal to not pick up today, but most of the time I'm just I've developed some great tools for identifying who it is that I am, what am I contributing to the world, um, what's my role in certain things, and just getting out of this mindset that the world is happening to us, and and that no one's really to blame for any of this, that there's some things that I can do. And even if I'm in a really tough spot, which I was at this particular point in beginning of 2006, very tough, negative amounts of money, uh, no education. I still had my GI Bill, which was great, and some people encouraged me to go to school, and so I decided to take advantage of that. And I applied to a bunch of different universities, and amazingly, I got in everywhere I applied. I'm still to this day a little bit confused about that because I was such a terrible student. But I think it's just because maybe I had the GI Bill, and they're like, "He can pay. Let's let him in."
Right.
And so uh, that worked out. And you're not taking any financial aid, and so maybe that, I don't know. Maybe those are factors. I have no idea, but it's less important for this. And then even that was very uncomfortable, right? I hadn't been to school. Now I'm 26 years old. I hadn't been to school in like 10 years, basically, right? I mean, by the end of high school, I just wasn't even going, and was thrust into these classrooms with bright-eyed, fresh-faced looking 17 and 18-year-old people, and I felt like an alien in there and was, very uncomfortable, but I stuck with what I was, what worked for me, which was just, getting up early, going through my little routine, creating a routine for myself, just like I had in the Marine Corps, where I'd get up, do basic stuff and get my day started, and um, get to my 12-step meetings and handle whatever, between school. I worked basically full time during my undergrad also, but just like kind of uh, for the university catering. And then I did like some side jobs doing things like that here and there. But I had several criminal convictions also. It was really hard to get jobs, nearly impossible. And so at that time, I would do a decent amount of work like under the table, got paid cash. Um, so once I got done with like my first year of school, I realized that I figured I would be a dentist. My grandfather was a dentist, and he was like he was, where I grew up, I thought he was a pretty successful guy. So that's what made sense to me. And so I studied to do that, which is why I have my biomedical science degree for my undergrad. And, but in the process of doing that, because I had these criminal convictions, what I realized was that even if I was to get into dental school, and go to dental school, it wouldn't be until after that, and I would apply to get licensure, that I'd really find out I would be able to get a license to do that, and more importantly, if I'd be able to get a DEA license to be able to write prescriptions. So, I mean, and I even went as far as like reaching out to the dental board of, examiners or whatever, and asking them like, hey, like, is this something that's going to be possible? This is what the scoop is. I've been sober this long. They're like, well, we can't guarantee anything. It's like, well, I don't have $300,000 I can do on a maybe.
Right.
That maybe, and especially years of my life. If you go to dental school for 3 or 4 years, and then just to find out that you you couldn't even have that as a career path. So I ended up. I also thought it would be cool to go to law school. But that was the same thing. It's like you go to law school, you get done, you apply, you take the bar exam, and it's not even until after you would pass the bar exam that they examine your character fitness. And so, that's again several year path just to find out that could be you make it, could be you don't. And so I didn't want to rest my hopes and dreams on those sorts of maybes. And I thought, well, all right, well, I knew that if I went and got a PhD, I could put some more letters after my name. By doing that, also, I put myself, by the time I'd finished my undergrad and I did my PhD, I'd at least have 8 years in between me and this um, really tough sort of existence that I was living, as long as I could continue to stay sober. And so there was a guy that one of my professors that was like, listen, you can go get a PhD, and that's basically free. You teach, uh, chemistry labs or whatever, and you can do that. And you have a gift for doing this. You've been working in my lab for a couple of years. Why don't you go do that? He knew my situation. I kept most things pretty close to the vest at that point. Like, I certainly wasn't going to talk about it openly like I am now. Um, and that was just because of the stigma that surrounds addiction. And I was just so desperate to dig myself out of this massive hole that I found myself in, right? And to create some new opportunities for myself. And I didn't want to stifle any of those opportunities by um, talking too much about what my past was like. And and then, and I'd gotten a lot of advice too from very smart people that were like, "Oh, you could never be a lawyer, you could never be a doctor." To That was why I would go to like the actual people that made the decisions, because I wanted to know directly from them. And it was a lot of work for me to figure those things out, who those people were, how I can get in contact with them, and to have conversations with those folks. So, anyways, I did all that. I did the PhD. That's why I got the PhD, was because I wanted to avoid any uncertainty with what I'd be able to do. At least this way, I could, worst case scenario, I could have some sort of academic job teaching physics or chemistry or something like that. And uh, I my
And at this point, have you had any relapse?
no, no. And so like my third year, um, my third year of my PhD program, I decided to do this internship at the patent office. And so I did like an internship at the USPTO the third year of my PhD. I had a PhD advisor that was nice enough to let me do that because I did get paid by the school. I didn't have to pay for it. And so I did that, and I worked in like a special unit at the patent office where they would look at these high tech companies that were disputing over patents. And it would be like, Google and Apple and Facebook. And I thought, this is pretty cool. And I was like, I think I want to get into this, but I was like, I don't want to work here at the patent office. I wanted to do it in private practice because those guys seem like they're doing a little bit better. And I've worked really hard to get where I'm at now. I'd like to have at least a couple bucks to rub together. And at the time, I still had, I had nothing, right? I mean, I was renting a room in this lady's basement in Washington, D.C. while I went to grad school. And I mean, that's a common kind of a grad school story, but I was an older student and was hoping that there'd be some sort of silver lining at some point. But nothing was seeming to appear, because even by the time that I got done with my PhD and I'm applying for jobs everywhere, I mean, I think I applied for, well over 200, if not 250 sort of jobs. It was so challenging to get it with previous criminal convictions to be able to get a job. And interestingly or ironically, one of the only offers that I had was from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Just I think because of like my prior service, and because of they have a process for disclosure of all those things, and so you go through and you tell them all the stuff, and they know it. They have access to all your files through government systems and things like that, anyways. And as long as you're just my experience has been, as long as I'm being honest about what my past is, that it's generally viewed favorably by most people. Some people, they're still, you can't get them over the hump, and maybe they've probably got their own story of getting burned by someone that treated them like crap, right? But shoot, I lost my train of thought. Where was I?
Well, I would like to take a minute here because there are a couple of things that you've mentioned that I want to peel on. But where you left was that you got an interview with the defense agency.
Oh yeah.
But before you dive into that, you mentioned some skills that you've learned to utilize to help
Yes.
to identify more of who you are. And as you're talking about this, the word identity keeps coming up in my mind, which is that it's not just who you are, but who you're not in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people think of identity as something you add on to, you put more components on, but in a lot of ways, it seems like identity is actually removing parts of you that are not yourself. And what might be scary about that is I think all growth requires some form of death. And that death is part of your former self in some ways. And it's the people that you used to hang out with, or the groups that associated with something that you're no longer trying to associate with. And that's sort of a hard thing because, if every Friday, Saturday night, you're spending time with these people, you're no longer doing that. So you have to find something else to fill your time. So I guess I'm just curious. I'm really fascinated by what skills you've developed that help you. Obviously, the 12-step program is something that you talk about. The discipline you've integrated from the Marine Corps of getting up early and sort of having a routine.
Very
What
disciplined.
are those things?
Yeah, I think super disciplined about finding the goals that I want to pursue and sticking to just those things. Like even when I was in my PhD program, like I stopped watching TV. then because I was like, well, this is just a waste of time, and I felt like I had years to make up for, and I had like a belly full of ambition of what I wanted to do, and I was doing my PhD program, and I'm getting a PhD in chemistry, by the way, and I did not have an undergraduate degree in chemistry, and so like the mathematics and the people in my PhD program were far more skilled than I was, and I had to put in a lot of work and effort just to get up the learning curve. Um, but I also think that uh, having some of those experiences, you become resilient. You don't beat yourself up too much, and you stop kind of listening to the peanut gallery. A lot of that applies in my entrepreneurial life today as well. I used to read a lot of books. This is probably super unpopular, but I know I heard like hard. It's a very rare day that I would read a book now. Maybe if I was reading something that was just for pleasure or something like that, but I don't read anything on like business or anything like that. And but it's mainly just because uh, I
You'd rather be doing.
yeah, I need to be doing it. And most of what I've learned is through my own experience, right? So that my experiences have informed me to make like objective decisions about figuring out what those goals are. I always like I think it's like the pilot story with Warren Buffett, where he's like, oh man, how could I be as successful as you or whatever? And he says, well, write down the 25 things you want to accomplish in your life. And then he's like, okay, pick five of them. And then he's like, you see the rest of those 20 things, avoid those like the plague. And I like that made sense to me. And I was like, oh man, because it's like a sacrifice. But you're like, oh, okay, but this is what I have to do. And I remember reading this 15 years ago or something like that, and was like, okay, cool, that's what I'm going to do. And I like wrote down my five things, and I'm like, if it's not any of these things, then I'm not going to do it. And like an example of that is in, um, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I know we're going to be limited on time eventually, and give myself some time to talk about a little bit about where I'm at now. But with the firm uh, today, a lot of that uh, discipline and resilience continues to play a significant role in what it is that I do, and objectivity, and not making emotional decisions, allowing myself to zoom out and to stay focused on whatever the goals are. And in things that are not my goal, if it doesn't look like success, then to not do it. And, um, like sometimes people will be like, oh, why don't you do this? Or why don't you do this particular program? Or why don't you do this? And I'll be like, well, because I don't know anyone there that's what I want to be. And so I stay disciplined about that stuff, recognizing that I only have so much time, and uh, I'm disciplined about my time as well. There's only so much time that we get, and I try to use it very wisely. And between having a very quickly growing law firm today and a family, um, it doesn't leave you with much,
I hear you.
if anything.
So let's jump into that. So you were at the patent office. I am curious how you went from the patent office to starting this law firm, which was originated as an IP law firm. It has since
That's right.
broadened.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
So I am curious. Talk us through just from the patent office to creating the IP firm. I think that's super interesting. But I want to leave a couple of minutes to ask some dad questions
Yeah, sure.
and talk about your help of in with incarcerated entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah. So,
let's start there.
yeah,
And from the
I got
patent
done with
office.
school. I was able to get a job at a law firm. And in patent law, you can get these jobs where you haven't taken any bar exams, but you are kind of working as like a technical specialist, because everything in patent law is very technical. And so, I was able to get a job like that because I have my PhD. I worked that job for 2 or 3 years. I also learned when I had that job that I knew that I could take the patent bar without going to law school, and so I did that, and um, I took the patent bar, passed that, and that's like a federal bar that allows you to practice in any state. And I figured that as long as I could pass that, then I could probably pass a state bar, because they still do the character fitness for the federal bar. And if they let you do it at a federal level, then they must let you do it at a state level, was my logic. And And then it turns out, like in California and Vermont, you can also take the state bar without going to law school. And so they have different requirements depending on which state you're going to do it. But in short, basically, uh, you're like in a mentee sort of
Right.
a
Like an
program.
apprenticeship type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. You find some other attorney that's willing to work with you for a few years and to sign off on that you're studying what you should be studying, and then at the end of that, you can go take the bar exam. And that was what I did. Um, Somewhere in though, I had taken the patent bar, and then I started my law firm after that with the idea that I could create something that was more flat fee based, and that I saw some law firms move like at a glacial pace. They're not particularly innovative. They have these big, arduous partnership structures where it's challenging for them to make decisions in any sort of nimble fashion because there's too many decision makers. I recognized these things and wanted to have something that was a bit faster growing and to incorporate new technologies as well. So I started something like in a one room co-working space office on MIT's campus about 10 years ago that was financially ruining me. And like one room windowless office. It was like the cheapest co-working space office that they had. And I was like, it was like a huge financial risk for me. It was still like $1,750 a month for that little one room. And I was like, this is crazy. Uh, but I knew that I was like on MIT's campus and I was doing patent law at the time. And I thought, man, if I can just get the scraps of what's going on here, I might do okay. Um, and we built like we incorporated some technology. We developed like this AI tool that really changed our trajectory a lot in the area of patent law. Um, and we went from being this small kind of one man shop to having offices around the globe today, adding a corporate practice. Like I said, we work with a lot of startups from solo entrepreneurs that are just getting started to global some of the largest global corporate companies in the world. We started with just our office here in Boston, like I'm actually talking to you today from my office in Boston at the top of the Hancock Tower. I have an office in Santa Monica, overlooks Santa Monica Pier in Malibu. That's my favorite office. I wish I was there. And then we have an office in Mayfair in London, and we're opening an office officially in Tokyo May 1st, and bring on a team of people there as well so that we can work across multiple continents and be able to provide basically, we're the only firm that exists on the planet that's our size, like this mid-sized law firm that has that global reach, which means we can beat people up on price point and stuff like that. But anyways, the goal though, like in asking like what are those things that I use today from those experiences that I've had in the past, uh, they're uh, you learn how to make quick decisions as well, right? Like you learn. I don't get in the mud and try to figure out all the little nits of everything. I generally tell people you don't want me to be your lawyer. You want someone that works here to be your lawyer. I'm really good at high level strategic thinking. I'm good at helping businesses position to make money. Um, but like getting into the legal weeds of things is not exactly what is my particular specialty. But we have plenty of people here that are much smarter than me, and that's another thing. Like making sure that you're hiring people that are smarter than yourself. You never want to be the smartest
Sure.
guy in the room, as they say. Yeah.
For sure. Well, let me ask a quick question. Not to discredit the corporate law, but I think there are the IP law is something that I think has a lot of tailwinds right now, given where we are in technology. And I'm just curious if you could just highlight what most lay people don't know about IP law.
Mm.
What do you think they misinterpret about what it is?
The things that when I'm having conversations with my like prospective clients and we're just getting on the phone, I'd say the biggest misconception is them thinking that they can't, whatever it is that they've done is not innovative. because it doesn't feel particularly innovative. Maybe they've been doing something for 20 years. They're an accountant that's been, or an engineer that's been working on the same sort of thing for 20 years. And when you're doing something for that long, nothing that you're doing seems that innovative, because oh, other people are working on something like this, or other people like this are working on something like this. But really, an invention is, for something that would become a patent, the combination of two known elements, right? Unless, of course, you're coming up with something new on the periodic table of elements, which is quite rare. And so no one's doing that, right?
Some
So
chemistry joke.
yeah, it's kind of a joke, and kind of, also like a good frame of reference. So that's the only thing that would not be a combination of known elements, right? Uh, Everything else is. And so I love this example. I worked with a car wash over the last few years to help them build a patent portfolio. We don't think of car washes as being particularly innovative, but we worked with them to develop a patent portfolio of like 40 to 60 patents on things that they were working on, and just new systems that they had made over the years, because most car washes have been using the same sort of systems for like the last 75 years. And when there's a breakdown, it's like, these are mom and pop shops that, until you can get the new part, is going to be down for like 2 weeks or something like that. And they need, you need to make money. So anyways, by way of example, like if a car wash can get 60 different patents on new sorts of technology just by combining known things like um, uh, payment processing systems and license plate recognition, and you sandwiching those things together in unique, new, non-obvious ways, then many other people, you can do something too. And I wrote an article in Entrepreneur magazine last fall. It's called like "Patent the Boring Stuff," I think was the title of it, something to that effect. That's because many of the things that have the most value in the patent world are not the things that are these bleeding edge innovations. They're not the rockets that take up that, from the launch pad and land back in the exact same location, because no one else will ever do that. That sort of a patent on something like that, the likelihood that that's going to be high value is basically, is very, very low. But where people, maybe you have an HR company and you build some sort of, software tools over the years that help that process flow, probably lots of people will need to use something like that, right? And so it doesn't seem particularly innovative to you, but most likely it is, and it's worth doing that. I know we have mutual friends that talk about this being your greatest asset is your IP, but it depends what you're going to do with it, and does it fit in your business? Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one last question before we start to wrap it up. But I know that you counsel incarcerated entrepreneurs who are coming out. I'm one that just stood out in my research talking about Thomas Alston.
Oh yeah.
What I saw was someone who was an entrepreneur, Caldwell says, and we're really good at helping entrepreneurs. He decided to assist Alston through the long, expensive process of obtaining a patent and monetizing it, potentially worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in billable hours, entirely for free. So I just was wondering if you could speak to mentorship and maybe hit with two birds with one stone, how you approach some of these skill sets as a dad with your own children. What are the lessons you take away? How do you communicate with them about resilience, about recovering from setbacks earlier in your life? You've done a remarkable amount of work in less than 20 years. That I kept thinking about the phrase, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but severely underestimate what they can do in 5.
Yeah.
I think that's a testament, you're a testament to that phrase. So I'm just curious, the role of mentorship and leadership as it relates to the work you're doing and as a dad.
Yeah, we've done some great pro bono work. I think the easiest way for me to summarize that, though, is at some point in my own trajectory, I began to do some volunteer work and to give back to the community, mostly to help me get into grad school. But what I realized over time was that when I stopped doing that, it didn't feel right. And so that's always been, doing some form of service outside of my work, I believe is very important for me to do. And it's core to what I want to accomplish each day anyways, is just to be of service to others. And, the ways that I bring this, as a dad, honestly, it's tough, like my life's very, very different from like when I was growing up, was very different from the lives of my children today, they have it, what I would consider to be pretty cushy. I mean, I feel like that's what all dads say, but like, it's like, what do we do though to make them be decent human being that respect other folks and the value of the dollar and have some good core values. Um, uh, for me, that's helping my children. I work with them to set goals. I mean, I have like a 10 and a 5-year old, and we do like do vision boards with them. I have like a monthly family meeting that
I
we
love
do
this.
where we
I
all
saw this post. It's so awesome.
where we keep track of what it is that we accomplished the last month, and this teaches them accountability, and what it is that the goals that we're going to set for the next month. If you can't measure it, then how will you do it, and how will you know you've accomplished it, right? And so, um, we're that's like the best way that I feel like that I can teach them some skills that uh, will have some real world application. It is, I'm sure, being a parent is one of the hardest things in the world. And we love them so much, and we just want them to have it easy. But the other thing that I know is that most of everything that I do today didn't come from things that were easy. And so I'm like, it's like, how can I carefully push them to do some things um, that will create some discomfort for them, but not, hardships. Like it's kind of like towing that line. So that's it's so important, and I think the big one there though is that it just deepens our relationship, right? Like we really build trust together uh, with the children by doing those things together, right? Because they're not just doing it; we do it too, and that allows us to all, like everyone as a family, to be like, okay, cool, we're all on this together. This is what we do to be successful. We know we know we're a little bit different than some families, but this is how we do it. We do it
Yeah.
together, and we do it as a team. Yeah.
That's a great way to end. I want to open it up to you. Any closing thoughts or things you think I might have missed?
I don't know. The only thing that I would say in closing, that I'm very grateful to be here today. And the number one principle in my own life is gratitude, right? Like even on the worst day, it's a pretty good day, man. So, counting my blessings every
Absolutely,
day.
man.
Yeah.
Well, the feeling is mutual here. Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Marcus, thank you, brother.
Okay. Thanks for listening. For a detailed list of episodes and show notes, visit scalesofsuccesspodcast.com. If you found this conversation engaging, consider signing up for our newsletter, where we go even deeper on a weekly basis, sharing exclusive insights and actionable strategies that can help you in your own journey. We'd also appreciate if you subscribed, rated, or shared today's episode. It helps us to attract more illuminating guests, adding to the list of enlightening conversations we've had with New York Times bestsellers, producers, founders, CEOs, congressmen, and other independent thinkers who are challenging the status quo. You can also follow us for updates, extra content, and more insights from our guests. We hope to have you back again next week for another episode of Scales of Success. Scales of Success is an Edge West Capital production.